Good day! Today's video is a 2-for-1 feature. It is the first cartoon appearances of the heroic She-Hulk and the villainous Hydra. So, alright, let's go!
Yeah! So, we start off in the law offices of superstar lawyer Jen Walters. She and her good friend, Dr. Steve Perry, are having a discussion about her latest case. She is trying to take down a man named Jasper Brin, who is a supposed leader of the terrorist group Hydra. When suddenly, Jen and Steve get attacked by Hydra. Like clockwork. And Jen is mad, right? She's super pissed. And you wouldn't like Jen when she's angry because she turns herself into a giant green Goliath named She-Hulk. And she hulks out by stopping these Hydra agents from getting away in their actually cool looking car and leaves them for the police. Meanwhile, Dr. Bruce Banner and his buddy Rick Jones hear about this She-Hulk versus Hydra action taking place in Los Angeles, and Bruce is like, yo man, we need to go there. I need her help. And Bruce takes us on a quaint little trip down memory lane to explain how Jen Walters became the She-Hulk. You see, Jen and Bruce are actually cousins. And Bruce was crashing at Jen's place because he needed a place to stay for a bit, right? And unfortunately, one fateful night, boom! There was a gas explosion in Jen's kitchen and she was horribly injured, like near fatal, right? With no time to spare, Bruce gave her a blood transfusion to save her life. And oh wait a second, he's the Hulk! His blood is gamma radiated and stuff, right? Will that affect Jen? Well, yes indeed. The same way a radioactive spider affects Peter Parker, Jen now has superpowers! Back to the present time. So Bruce and Rick make it to Los Angeles, but they are too late. Jen has been Jen-napped. But lucky for her, Jen makes use of a random guy with an armload of pamphlets to make a diversion to help her escape. That sounds oddly specifically convenient, but hey man, whatever helps you get out of there, right? And now Jen is on the run when suddenly some ghost cloud thing follows her, grabs her, picks her up, and takes her back to Hydra headquarters. I don't think you need the Hulk, I think you need the Ghostbusters, man. And in Hydra headquarters, the leader, Supreme Hydra, tells Jen to drop the Jasper Brin case. You know, like, Hydra is a worldwide terrorist organization and all that, but they don't need any bad publicity, apparently. Jeez. And like, realistically, man, if this really was Hydra, Jen would be dead right there and then, man. You know? Or at least Hydra would try. But, you know, this is a kid's cartoon, so yeah, the story continues. And they just throw Jen into some jail cell room thing. Elsewhere, Bruce Banner's lady friend, Betty Ross, shows up in Los Angeles to start working with Jen's friend, Dr. Steve Perry. They are collaborating on this new device to deal with the smog problem in LA. And it's about freaking time, you know? Back to Hydra. Jen breaks out of her prison room, you know, the old-fashioned way by picking the lock and all that stuff. And she stumbles upon a Hydra meeting where the Supreme Hydra demonstrates this new machine of theirs. This machine can turn smog solid and make it controllable and explodable. What? I guess that's the cloud that captured Jen earlier. Does that machine only work on smog, or like, could it also work on fog and or smoke? You know? Either way, man, that's pretty hardcore there, Hydra, like, wow. So Jen figures she needs to run away, you know, to tell people about this, but the Hydra agents chase her down. She doesn't like that, so she goes back into She-Hulk mode. And she starts beating the crap out of every Hydra agent that's in her way. She eventually breaks out of the building and meets up with Bruce and Rick. And this is where Bruce needed Jen's help. So seeing as Jen is able to control when she turns into She-Hulk, Bruce tries to transfer some of that control from Jen to himself so he can control his own Hulk. Which I don't really know like how that works, but Bruce Banner is a genius, man, so I'm just gonna go with his word, you know? But the experiment was a success. He can turn to the Hulk at will, and he can keep his intelligence while he's the Hulk. She-Hulk. But Rick has been ricknapped by the Hydra smog, and Supreme Hydra sends his threats and demands to General Ross and, well, presumably the governments of the world about the dangers of smog. So Rick and Betty have to escape their Hydra prison, and Rick is able to get to Hulk and She-Hulk to let them know what is going on.
Unfortunately,
Bruce Banner's experiment dissipates and Hulk goes back into Savage Hulk mode. And he sees She-Hulk as a threat, you know, because there can only be one Hulk. Rah! So Hulk and She-Hulk actually have a pretty awesome fight. Unfortunately, this fight gives Supreme Hydra time to implement his smog weapon. And now it's up to Betty Ross to stop Supreme Hydra from setting off this weapon. And after a little bit of a tussle with him, Betty wins and hogties Supreme Hydra. Yeehaw! And it's at this point that everybody turns into the Scooby-Doo gang because they unmask Supreme Hydra, and we find out that this whole time he is Dr. Steve Perry? Yoinks! And he would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for those meddlesome gamma-radiated teenagers. So the day is saved, right? Well, for now, anywho. Supreme Hydra is arrested, you know, even though someone else will take his place, but that's kind of makes it a wash. But for the here and now, it's all good. And Jen meets up with Jasper Bryn, the person she was trying to bring down in court. But it turns out he's a reformed Hydra agent, and he wants to take Jen out on a date, even though Hydra just tried to kill her and all that kind of stuff, and one of her best friends, Steve Perry, turned out to be a Hydra agent. Yeah, sure, Jen. Blindly trust this Jasper Bryn guy. I'm sure nothing will go wrong. But either way, that is the end of this series. Fantastic story.
Well, yeah, man, that was a pretty awesome episode. I may be a little biased, you know, cheering for green heroes, you know, and all that, but man, I really gotta say, this was actually pretty good. And, like, I will admit, I've never watched this Incredible Hulk TV series before, so this was my first introduction to it. And indeed, yes, full marks, well done. So the presentation of the episode had its, you know, usual early 80s kind of corny charm to it, right? But the story was pretty solid. Every single scene was jam-packed with information, you know, like there was no filler scenes, there was no scenes that, you know, kind of carried on for too long just to burn time. No, there was actually quite a bit going on in it, right? The only thing that really boggled my mind, man, was, you know, the clothes of Hulk and She-Hulk. So, when they were in human form and they were turning into their respective Hulks, like, their clothes would rip and tear, right? In the case of Bruce Banner, his shirt would be destroyed completely and he'd be topless. But yet, when they transformed from Hulk form back to human forms, their clothes magically repaired themselves. Like, in fact, Bruce Banner's t-shirt and tie would just appear out of nowhere, man. Like, did he actually just absorb his shirt when he turned into the Hulk? Like, it makes no sense. One thing that did make a whole lot of sense was the fight between Hulk and She-Hulk. Man, like, that was an awesome fight, you know? The action in these cartoons are usually pretty good, man, but to see these two green Goliaths go at it, like, holy crap, man. Like, I was very impressed by it. It is kind of funny, though, right? Like, She-Hulk is trying to calm down the Hulk while simultaneously punching him in the face. And speaking of the two Hulks, right? Like, if Jen Walters got her She-Hulk powers by getting a blood transfusion from Bruce Banner, could Bruce Banner basically build an army of Hulks by doing the same thing to other people? Like, he could turn Rick Jones into a Hulk who could control his own, you know, emotions, right? Like, that would be actually pretty beneficial to him. But Hulk no need backup. Rah! Hulk is strongest there is! This is kind of a really small point, but I think I read it online somewhere, and it makes, you know, kind of sense, right? Hydra's logo doesn't make sense. The Hydra, you know, from ancient Greek stories, is a serpent with one body but many heads, whereas the logo for Hydra is one head with many limbs. That's kind of the exact opposite of what a Hydra is. But it's still a pretty cool logo, man, so I'm not really gonna go into it much more. And like I say, man, this episode was awesome. She-Hulk was actually really awesome, and Hydra was awesome in it too. You think they would have shown Hydra a lot more in this kind of series, you know, or in this Marvel animated universe at this time, but no! And She-Hulk actually probably could have had a spin-off show of her own on this one. Like, you know, they did have, like, Spider-Woman in this animated universe and stuff like that, so yeah, she could have been there, but nay. But let us go take a little deeper look into She-Hulk and Hydra's comic book history.
So yeah, She-Hulk, hey? How did she come to be? Well, in a word, copyright. What do I mean? Well, back in the 1970s, there was a very successful and popular TV show called The $6 Million Man. You know, it was about a guy who was severely injured and was rebuilt as a cyborg, basically, you know, with super strength and heightened senses, you know, like a superhero kind of. And this show was produced by Universal Television. So seeing as this show was such a big hit, Universal figured, you know what, if we make a spin-off of this show, man, we'd have two of the same shows going at the same time, we'll get a whole lot more money coming in our way. And so they did just that. The spin-off series was called The Bionic Woman. It was basically the exact same show, right? You know, the main difference being that the lead character was now a woman. Which is all hip and all, right? But it did have Marvel Comics worried a little bit. So at the same time, Universal Television was also producing The Incredible Hulk TV show. You know, that legendary show with Lou Ferrigno all dressed in green body paint? And those at Marvel were like, huh, if Universal made a female version of the $6 Million Man, what would stop them from making a female version of the Hulk for a new TV show? Like, we don't have that character, we wouldn't even own the copyrights to that. We'd be screwed out of that money. So Stan Lee decided to beat Universal to the punch, and he created the new Green Goliath, She-Hulk. So if Universal did make a show at that point, hey man, Marvel would be getting all that sweet copyright money coming their way. And with this new creation, She-Hulk debuted in The Savage She-Hulk #1 in 1978. And this featured episode has a lot of elements that were taken from the comic books and, you know, put into the cartoon. But, you know, not a complete copy, right? So it's true that Bruce Banner and Jen Walters are cousins. In both stories, Bruce went to LA to get help from Jen. It was because of Sanctuary, you know, like a place to hide. When Bruce returned to LA, it was to get Jen's help to control his inner Hulk the exact same way that Jen has control over her Hulk. So yeah, like Jen can change from human form to She-Hulk form at will. You know, it's not based on anger like the Bruce Banner Hulk. And when she turns into the She-Hulk, she doesn't lose her intelligence like Bruce does, right? Like Bruce just goes angry like some crazy fan from Manchester. And indeed, Jen is a criminal lawyer, a successful one at that. Slight difference though, in the comics she was in a case involving a mob boss named Nick Trask, whereas in this episode she was on a case involving Hydra. So the stakes are much higher, but you know, the same kind of deal. And in both stories, Jen did get a blood transfusion from her cousin, Bruce Banner, which led to her becoming the She-Hulk. But the injury of her needing a blood transfusion, quite a bit different. So as we've seen in this episode, it was a gas leak explosion in the kitchen, and you might think that's kind of a random explanation, because, you know, it kind of is. In the comics, it was a little bit more serious. She was injured when one of Trask's men shot her in the back. Crazy. So yeah, for this cartoon, they're not gonna show somebody getting shot, you know? So a kitchen disaster? I guess that's good enough of a replacement reason? So while yes, there was quite a bit of similarities between both stories, you know, the whole attack with Hydra and the smog and all that kind of stuff, yeah, that was not in there, so it was cool, right? But, you know, not kind of what you've seen before. So that's pretty much how we got She-Hulk. And now, for the villains of the episode, Hydra. So Hydra first appeared in Strange Tales number 135 in 1965. Hydra was created basically to be a perfect enemy for S.H.I.E.L.D. You know, S.H.I.E.L.D. being basically a counter-terrorism organization, and well, now you have a terrorist organization called Hydra, right? So originally they were an organization run by the Red Skull in Germany during World War II, and they were an offshoot of the German powers at the time. But Hydra still continued to exist outside of World War II, right? And they're still bent on world domination by any means necessary. But this episode does have a pretty good representation of what Hydra was in the comic books, right? Especially in those early stories. Hydra is very technologically advanced, and they have a lot of crazy new, like, fangled weapons, right? And yes, they do have those crazy green-yellow jumpsuits, man, which actually look pretty good. And for sure indeed, man, in the comics as well, the leader of Hydra is called Supreme Hydra, but the character of Steve Perry from this episode and Jasper Bryn, they were never in the comics, they were actually just made for this episode, so they don't really count. And the last thing that Steve Perry did utter when he was arrested as Supreme Hydra was the Hydra motto: "If a head is cut off, two more shall take its place." Which is pretty accurate and kind of ominous, right? Like, Hydra is a pretty big organization, man. They could replace anybody at any time, you know, if they had to. So this story is the first foray featuring She-Hulk and or Hydra. We will see much more of them later on down the road in the future from this point. But for now, it was pretty awesome seeing them together and being pretty comic book accurate. But yes, indeed, with this, that, those, and the other things, I guess, that's that. Also, if you guys are interested, I created my own superhero show, and I have the first episode out already. The Adventures of the Density. So, if you guys would like to check it out, I'll have a link above here and a link at the end of the video for you to peruse there. Yeah, right on, and there you go. So, thanks for watching the video. I hope you liked it as much as I did making it. Also, feel free to check out the source material that I featured in this video. And if you want to leave a comment on anything you may have liked or things I might have missed in this, you know, feel free to do so. Or anything else, you know, just to say hi. That's cool too. And other than that, you know, have a great day. Thanks.